Chijo Cairo Carose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to AGO from Home. My name is Boyana Stančić, and I'm the Assistant Curator, Live Projects and Performance at the Art Gallery of Ontario. Today, I'm deeply honored to be able to host choreographer, artist, art strategies consultant, Kevin A. Ormsby and Tanya Howard, first soloists of the National Ballet of Canada. Welcome both. You were able to see them in the introductory clips, both performing. It is such deep pleasure to host you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you
for having us.
Pleasure. Before we get into the conversation, however, I do want to first acknowledge that the Art Gallery of Ontario operates on land that is the territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga Nation and was also the territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee. Since May, I've been hosting this digital program, first as a way to keep in touch with our audiences as well as artists and celebrate things we got to do together, as well as support in any way we could explorations into the new post-COVID future for performance and congregation. And then since July, when the gallery reopened, with my colleagues began literally exploring what we could offer safely as a space of live engagement. One of those offerings involved today's guests who were in rehearsal for a new project. And we at the gallery offered to host one of their open rehearsals as part of this COVID era soft touch revitalization programs. But like everything else about this moment and the inherent instability of a pandemic, with the most recent upturn in cases and renewed restrictions, we weren't able to host them physically, but are still so thankful to get to talk to them and share their vision in this way. So welcome again, both. And thank you again so much for joining us. It is really unfortunate we're not meeting in person, but I think hopefully we can speak to even a larger audience this way. So to go back to the root of this entire conversation, Kevin, would you be able to tell us what you have been working on and what you would have been presenting sort of today at the AGO?
Yeah, I'm part of the Spotlight series with Jera Wolf, and my work, Trespa, was looking at the footsteps that we bring. So the composer, David Bontep, is Haitian. He lives in Montreal, and that was a work that was basically for percussion, triangle, double bass, violin, and cello. And I enjoyed that conversation. But what was really beautiful about arriving at his music was that he was using the traditional structures from four particular movement and music styles from Haiti that he had then composed into the forms. And I was just blown away by hearing them, and in conversation with him, wanted to honor him more than myself and or the dancers around the history that was a part of that composition. And so I had a conversation with him first that was, what inspired him, what sort of things he envisioned physically, movement structure wise, that could land in the piece. And then this is what I also took into creating the work as well. As you mentioned, we, at the end of last Friday, had finalized what was going to be 3 sections of the work, and was really excited to go back in and sort of like fine tune and amplify some of the cultural nuances that would be a part of the work as well. When, we got notice that we needed to put it on pause, because we'd have been in your space actually tomorrow, rehearsing and sharing that work with whomever came into the AGO as well.
Thank you. I mean, it is really deeply unfortunate. Everything was also really quite ready. You're not a large group. There's, I believe, 3 dancers and you, Kevin. So there was possibility, but yeah, it is unfortunate. But maybe and hopefully we are going to be able to reschedule at some point. I really do sort of like hope for that. And Tanya, obviously you are part of this work, but you've also been part of the National Ballet of Canada for over 2 decades. We just established through my research and your confirmations, which is deeply exciting. I mean, so you carry so much knowledge and history in that way as well. I'm curious, from your perspective, with all the changes and cancellations of performances, what has really affected you negatively? And is there some silver lining as well in this moment?
I mean, thank you for that nice intro. The silver lining part is so hard because, it's human nature to look for that. And we really need to hang on to that. But it's a really tricky time. It's a really fragile time right now. So that has been harder on some days. The positive stuff that has come out of this is, I should say that the stuff that I miss the most from performing is that aspect of being live, and of having those moments before, when I'm ready to perform and when you're sitting in your seat and checking that your phone is off, and those last minute there's seconds before we take each other's breath away, Right. So I've really missed that. I've missed the interaction of hearing people's response to what you do immediately. I do miss that, and I do long for that, for when it comes back. But I guess if I were to find a silver lining, there have been a lot of smaller projects that have come out of this, and forcing yourself to be, somebody would say, can you just send me like a minute of performance? And I'm like, I'm not a choreographer. I can't, what do you want me to do? But then, being forced in that corner of trying to be creative. And it's not that we don't have the vocab, because over a 22-year career you do get exposed to a lot of different dance styles and different people. It's just having to look inside and sort of see that part of you, or see yourself in that light. That's been a positive, if I can find one.
Absolutely. But I think it's interesting because it is such a sort of double-edged sword. I also miss those kinds of interstitial moments, like the shuffling of the audience before you take the stage, or sort of just hearing that kind of tension that's just purely in the air. It's like totally spatial. But then by taking those away, those interstitial spaces, you do get to look inside in a totally different way, because like there's nowhere else to look. So it's interesting where the opportunities for growth are, and sort of, I guess, understanding what to not replicate again. Thank you. That's a beautiful answer, and applause. I'm wondering if applause is also like one of those things, because I definitely missed it quite a bit.
You know, it's a little bit, the applause thing, you know, could be like the, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it. So, you know, after I did a thing for CBC in my backyard actually, and there was no applause, right? And it was so beautiful to get to a point where I was like, I was okay with it, because I had made my little piece, and I hadn't told my neighbors I was doing it. And slowly with the music, they started peeking their heads over the fence. And I said to the producer, I was like, we're like snake charmers. We're, you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we're 2,000 people or 4. It doesn't matter if there's applause. Like, this is what art does. It just brings people out.
Absolutely. So next question, perhaps for both of you, with this piece, going back to Trespass, Kevin, you have been artistic director of Cachet Dance, a company that sort of fuses both contemporary dance, ballet, of course, and dance from Caribbean and Afro diaspora. How did these influences translate into this framework with Trespass? And for you, Tanya, was there a difference, or what is the difference in direction? And you mentioned movement vocabulary for this project as opposed to any of the other offerings of the ballet's repertoire that you participated in?
Wow, I think for me, I lead with all my ancestors and experiences in every work that I do. So for me, we started actually in a circle, which was literally a whole bunch of questions that I call vocal dance, and also writing home around ancestors. And those could be parents, those could be grandparents. So for me, I wanted to make sure that I was amplifying what I know the composer was curious about exploring in a contemporary time. And I did draw from movement vocabulary from Haiti, and also from the Caribbean space and from Africa into the work, and found a way, and we were still exploring ways to marry all those conversations, all those techniques into Trespass. Because again, it was about footsteps, you know, and I think there's rhythm in footsteps, there's musicality in footsteps, there's musicality in technique. And I was also curious about bringing those things to the work. Most of my work that I do with Cachet Dance as well takes a longer time to develop. They normally are done in like a 2-year, 3-year sort of production phase, where I do like, you know, a first phase initial exploration and a second phase like showcase before I go to the production of it. So for me, it was really just investigating, researching some of the context of what I wanted to bring into this particular work, and how that was marrying with what the composer and I were talking about, but what I was curious about amplifying for the dancers to experience as well in the work. We're getting there. You know, I love the moments when I arrived in the studio and the 3 dancers just inspired me to go back home and pull out I have a big black book, pull it out and start to make notes on different things that I see that are nuances that are arriving from the African and Caribbean space and the Canadian space into their bodies, and amplifying those things, because I think that's where the beauty is. For me in this work, the challenging part was, again, as Tanya mentioned, the interaction. Mm-hmm. You know, I love when dancers are connecting and having tactile versions of movement structures, and we weren't able to connect in that way because of, you know, being 6 feet apart. So I had to figure out formatically and also choreographically how to create those particular connections with this idea of like being 6 feet apart. And if I could show the audience that sort of interpersonal relationship that I wanted to actually have the dancers understand from the very beginning. It's a work in progress. We're getting there. And I think that's been one of my deepest insecurities, is actually, how do I create that structure while still being apart? While they are also moving through space, how can I amplify space with choreography and movement? And how do I support their learning and understanding of all these particular cultural nuances and movement structures that are from the Caribbean and from Africa, with an African influence into their bodies as well. So that way they're also amplifying it through their experiences, through their, through their techniques that they might experience as well and known for many years into their bodies.
Thank you so much for that. That really does clarify, but also open up new spaces for interpretation and curiosity too.
Mhm.
I'm curious, Tanya, for you, how is this a different process than, and again, the rest of the repertoire in your sort of rich career?
So I'll just have to say again how lucky I am to be at the National Ballet, who does foster such a broad repertoire. So Kevin's work was not a complete departure because we've done a lot of contemporary works, we've done modern works, you know, Marie Chouinard, William Forsythe is sort of our spectrum. So and Kevin's work is based on dance language that you have come across before, you are familiar with. So the differences were right off the bat, like what he was saying. We sat in a circle. Also, I think when you just mentioned that your company sort of does things over a longer period of time, we don't often have that luxury. So we often have, you know, 6 weeks or whatever, and it has to be the entire thing. So we don't often get a lot. It's sort of as needed, the information we get from the choreographer, but this was a bit of a luxury experience to be able to sit down and have the time to get to know each other. It's always an interesting thing for me because when the choreographer comes into the room, they have been thinking and dreaming about this project for months, if not years. Whereas for me, I have not met him. I have not heard the music. I am expected to get on board in 4 minutes. You know, so this is a very intricate and special relationship that sometimes has to be like decided by the universe kind of thing, because it's not like an artist who has paint that's having a bad day. Mm-hmm. Or you know, your clay is not performing as you like. A lot of times so that is always very interesting for me, those first 4 minutes where he has to get me completely on board with his project that, you know, he is already in knee deep because he's been thinking about it for so long, but I just walked in the room with him, you know. So it's that part has been very interesting because Kevin does have a lot of information to share with us. But you know, the clip we just saw when I'm wearing the white dress, that section is a bit of an improv. So the only direction that I got was those last seconds in a movie before when your life flashes before your eyes. That's what I was told.
That was the prompt.
Yes. And go. So then I wrote some keywords. At one point, I do something like this with my arms, and that was my interpretation of grocery shopping because it's one of the things that I do. There's a part where I put my arm like this because I'm picking up my dog business. You know, I just wrote things about my life and made it like that. So this was it wasn't a complete stretch, but it was still very interesting to have this one-on-one kind of experience.
There's 3 performers in this piece. Is that correct? Tanya being one and 2 others. And then of course the musicians. I didn't realize, I have to admit, like that music was sort of predated the movement, which I think is a really interesting sort of like approach. But yeah, thank you. And is that going to be performed live? Do you know that to be the case?
That's the intent. It might have variations on that, but what was really interesting for me with that was actually to have, as I mentioned, all the musicians as a part of the video experience, part of the online recording experience, as part of the work. I know I've been working primarily with the dancers and the repertoire, who's Rex Harrington in the space. The other dancers are Tegan Taylor Richmond, I believe, or Richmond Taylor. I can't remember if I'm mixing it up.
Richmond Taylor, yeah. Richmond
Taylor and Ben Rutson. So this also bring them into the conversation as well, because I wanted to I was curious about how to amplify the space with the musicians for which we've not been rehearsing with. We've been rehearsing with the music, recorded music. And yes, it was recorded also earlier. I Sean Sutherland, a friend of mine, who's a pianist, recommended the musician to me, and I heard the music and I went, wow, this is interesting. It has so many connections here. And so for me, I also wanted to make sure that the dancer, I don't normally create a lot, going back to the creation process, I don't normally create a lot with the music I'm going to use, because I am always worried when dancers get married to music rather than actually music being a response to as part of the conversation in the dance. So I normally introduce the music later. And even for this process, I also did that as well, where I'd come in and we'd work on movement structures, or I'd tell the dancers, here's a sequence, mess it up. I don't care what you do with it. Let me see, you know, and we created some really beautiful moments together from these small phrases that they'd learned that they messed up, that we worked and shaped together to as part of the piece. But I was still very much cognizant of how the music would be a part of that oral response that people would experience as well in the work.
Thank you. Kevin, I have to sort of bring up also the other part of your career in life, which is sort of your work in arts consultancy and organizations like Cultural Pluralism in the Arts. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but it's an incredible organization. And so I'm curious, how does that sort of like work within sort of like a broader field of culture influence your creative practice specifically? And if there was anything of this moment in time that has made it into this specific piece?
Wow. As program manager for, it's such a long title, Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement Ontario, SUPAMO for short. We do a lot of work around equity, diversity, inclusion, and inclusivity in the arts sector. But one of the main things is that we're looking at a plural representation of persons, peoples, the arts in general in the Canadian society. And so for me, I always approach my work from a very pluralistic standpoint. I like when dancers face what is the audience. So they're facing back, their backs are seen when they're thinking about that sort of like circular way of thinking about movement. So they're, you're animating space in different ways. And I tend to choreograph that way, even before starting working with SUPAMO. My choreographies was always curious about, the sort of quasi relationships, the diagonal relationships, the circular relationships, the lines, and you're working and moving through these particular planes all at once. And this work definitely has a lot of that, where you're shifting planes and shifting directions in space, and you're given different prompts of spaces and places to go, and where you want, I, as a choreographer, want and different sort of physical animations to manifest itself in space. And I just love my work with Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement Ontario, just because it's an added way to contribute to the word of sort of what I call diverse artistic practices, or the amplification of diverse techniques across the Canadian landscape and across the Canadian art scene.
Incredible, thank you. Yes, I do. In reading some of the interviews that you're given in the past, you sort of locate yourself very much as sort of an immigrant and a settler, and I think both of you actually share that, Tanya as well, and I do too. So it was just always really interesting to kind of think about unpacking that a little bit more, and how that sort of like moves into the space of creation and relation. So thank you for that answer. And finally, just to kind of wrap up in a sort of positive note, and again, I definitely do aspire to meet you in person and to hopefully be able to host this project when we can. But what are you looking forward to next? Is there something on the horizon, or is there something that you would like to put on the horizon?
I'll allow Tanya to go first.
I'm just looking back to a little bit more of a defined moving forward, whatever it is. I feel this, the limbo with where we are now is really difficult.
Yep.
So I'm looking forward to whatever our new avenue is, because I know we work with such innovative people, such creative people, that I know it's coming. So I'm looking forward to how we spin this,
To see on the other side what it's going to look like. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think for me, spinning off what Tanya is saying, is I honestly am we arrived at the breakthrough, as I mentioned. We'd mapped out the 3 sections, and I'm really looking forward to going back in now and amplifying that breakthrough with the dancers, and creating what, we can all feel even more confident about in the work. For my company, because of COVID, we'd had to postpone our 10th anniversary production. So I'm looking forward to going back into the studio also with my dancers and thinking about what that is going to be in the near distant future. And then also what my creative practice will be coming out of COVID. I've been thinking about that a lot since the initial lockdown. How will sort of Zoom and online presence and platforms be a part of the amplification of the company's work? How conversations are also important for the arts, for the sector, like this one. And what it means when we've been working a lot with being in a physical space, and how can we now start to amplify spaces like the digital space with the same sort of work that we were doing in the physical space. But of course, consistently, that's been the challenge.
I do have to sort of give kudos to the ballet. I mean, some of the digital programs that have been coming out since the pandemic and the lockdown were really incredible. And there were new creations too, in a certain way, not just, conversations like the one that we're staging now, which is also why, as I was saying before, find it really important to show clips of the performance, just to really tease out what it is really the content and the subject of these conversations, and future aspirations for new intimacies, for new spaces. You're talking about sort of 6 feet and choreography. Like, is that a vernacular that becomes part of like your future work? Will you ever think about it again after lockdown? So anyways, thank you so much for that insight and for your time. I'm so deeply grateful, and I'm looking forward to the Spotlight series premiering. It's going to be on the ballet website. And again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you also to TD and the Ready Commitment, who is our sponsor of these talks and performances that have generously supported us through this time. I must also mention Christopher Stowell and Melinda Bale from the National Ballet of Canada, who were crucial in terms of putting us together to begin with. And also some of my colleagues on the AGO side, Deviani Salzman, Deb Nolan, Johnson No, and Danny Winchester. And thank you, our audiences, for joining us. We are so grateful for your support and trust, and really look forward to seeing you again.
Indeed, we all breathe, feel, and dance. I feel that dance is a movement that we do. It's not just a technical form. It doesn't exist in the studios only. The movement we do down the streets, the pushing of the strollers, anything that is movement-based, gesture-based, can inform dance. It can inform creation, and I love that. And that in dancing, everyone should have a meaningful experience. My piece is called Traces de Pas, which is looking at traces and footsteps. I'm looking at the idea of the ways in which we arrive in space to do the work that we do as dancers. What are the ancestries and the things that we carry into those particular space? And how do we honor them and invite audiences into the body, the person moving, rather than the technique moving? I'm really using a natural perspective in terms of how we move innately in our bodies, the archetype of their bodies, the poses that exist in their bodies. And I'm augmenting those particular relationships through technique, through contemporary dance, along with the structure of the music to amplify what will become Traces de Pas. It starts out in a duet structure. I have to break expectations about seeing those dancers connecting with each other, contacting each other, because it's also been filmed and was created in a time of COVID. And so I have to think about how to amplify those two bodies in space, and then how a third body will be introduced to the work to break that relationship. Just really thinking about what exactly are the states. See, states, I talk about states of being. There's a responsive space, a contemplative space, an observing space. So all these concepts also of how do we respond to history? How do we contemplate our own impact on the world? How do we observe others in space is very much a part of this work as well. We start by exploring material rather than going in and saying, I have this material, learn this, and then you replicate it. We go in with that material and then we amplify it in space. So I might say, take half the phrase and you do it on this particular path. Or take the other half and do it over here. At the end of the day, because it's a choreography, it becomes the piece. But you're always innately having that conversation with music. So maybe you arrive at a particular space and place early, but you know what you've been doing, you know the music intimately, so you can amplify that moment. And that moment for me is quite okay. So how do you transform an experience of a theater into an experience that is now online or seen through recording? And I think there's many things there also about using the online platform and a recorded video platform as an introduction to something, as an experience. How do you create that experience? For me, the intimacy of that experience amplifies the intent. I'm curious about having the audience who will be online, so they're a part of the choreography, they're a part of the movement structure. Because in a time like this, I think it's about also how audiences, viewers are finding meaning with dance and finding meaning with the dancers and the skill and the athleticism it takes to actually execute movement in dance. The power of dance for healing inward, the things that we have are questioning, becomes something that is not about outward. It becomes an inward expression. And the more we can actually think of dance as an inward expression that we're sharing to someone, is the more we're actually healing ourselves and then offering that healing to somebody else. There's many things that exist in the world and society around us that dance offers as a solution and a possibility at the same time. Yay, Tanya! That's the look.
Incredible.
That's the
video.
look.
Oh my God.
That's the look.